So the Justice League, City Repair, whatever you want to call it, then decides to start occupying the downtown public square, fill the streets with thousands of people wearing animal costumes on Earth Day, create an ephemeral village of creativity and celebration and interaction and dance and so much more, and people would come in and learn and connect with others. And this became the ephemeral Earth Day village that would move around the city from place to place every year since the year 2000. This is the promotional poster, and you see Gaia is actually occupying this giant skyscraper and looking down at everyone and just kind of laughing at the city and saying, you know, it's all mine anyway, ha 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 ha. So after these kinds of ephemeral projects, people want to go back to their communities and make these things permanent. So in the Sunnyside neighborhood, they take the sunflower, which is their neighborhood logo, and they put it down at 33rd and Yamhill. And then the effect starts to radiate down the streets with community saunas, memorials to people who have been killed on their bikes, community trellises over the sidewalk corners, solar-powered recirculating fountains, cob kiosks that are solar-powered and glow at night, places for people to sit, and so much more. And then in the Buckman neighborhood, someone had just read that obesity is the second leading killer of Americans. So these people in the Buckman community said, let's take a permaculture approach to the whole thing. Maybe if we create a walking maze and get a bunch of large Americans out here, we can slow traffic while people lose weight. So you've got an herb spiral here, and you've got a kiosk and places to sit. This is in farther North Portland, where they took this neighborhood took a traffic island of grass, inflected the sidewalks into the center to create an edge for bioswales and the rise of a food forest there. So curb cuts allow water to remediate directly off of the street and not enter into the stream or the river nearby, and therefore kill fish. So this is kind of an oasis and an amphitheater intersection at the same time. This is another one in North Portland. Another one in Northeast Portland, farther away. Another one in Southeast as well. This is in Northeast again. Each one of these is expressive of a story. It has its own sort of set of metaphors, its own community. It's an expression of the people who come together to design this over the course of a few workshops, and they fund it, and then they install it together. Here you even have firemen coming out to help paint the street. In the King neighborhood, they did 3 of these in one day. This is one of the more recent ones in farthest North Portland. They have 2 gigantic salmon. Here's one of them, and then the other one is coming from this direction, and then they kiss in the middle with this kind of sunburst. This is the St. John's neighborhood. So the idea has been to try to install at least one of these in each one of the 96 neighborhoods of Portland by the year 2005, actually, is how old this graphic is. We didn't get to every neighborhood by that time. Mostly, they're on the east side and not on the affluent west side. But we are now as far north and south and east and west as you can possibly go in the city limits, and there are more than 200 permanent installations across the city. So I should also say, when we knew that somewhere between 10 and 15 of these installations, that they would start to happen in other cities. And fully recognizing that permaculture and all of these other things that we're doing, like natural building, ecological design, are already underway in lots of other places. But what we were going to be contributing that we hoped other cities would pick up was the idea of strategically locating things in public spaces so that people, thousands of people who weren't aware of these issues or had ever heard of such things, would be interacting every day and seeing these things in public space. So that's the edge, one of the edges that we've gone to try to shift and accelerate the processes of change in Portland, Oregon. So in the void behind us, as we're pushing that edge, the rest of the society will shift. I think that's what we've been contributing to. This is one of the most wonderful things that we've helped to create. This is Dignity Village in Portland, Oregon, again, in North Portland. And it began with a nomadic kind of collection of people who were determined to camp together. This was after the anti-camping ordinance had been declared illegal in Portland because, as the judge said, you can't criminalize people. It's unconstitutional to say that someone can't sleep outside simply because they're impoverished. And so these people began to camp together. First there were only 6 of them, then they grew to something like 100. Camping in these clusters of circles, affinity groups, and then they had representatives to a village council. So they'd already realized that they were a village. The city council granted them an acre of land where they could continue with their experiment And out of the waste stream, they started to build with materials to create their fabulous new village. And one of the things that they said at the beginning that was persuasive to the city council was that, you're trying to get communities across the city to undertake voluntary simplicity measures to be models for addressing global warming. We will be your model. We will be the ones that provide an example for the lowest possible impact on the earth. We will be not only a walkable community free of cars, but we will also be the most talkable community. People will come in here and repair themselves and return to their families and society as functioning members of the community as much as possible. And compared to the cost of most shelters, that is $60 to $90 a night, this one would be free or perhaps less than $10 a night, and nobody would pay for anything. So they had created an economic approach that would attract all sorts of in-kind materials and services that would support the village, but fundamentally they would run it themselves as a process of repairing themselves. So the Dome of Democracy is where the council meets around a round table, and then this is the witch's hat within which the rest of the community, the whole community, can meet and gather around a hearth. Part of our proposal to the city council was that this nomadic village would establish settlement patterns with pathways, gateways for entering the site, a center that would be this cultural nexus around which tents would be clustered that would provide cultural functions, gathering spaces, and then clusters of affinity groups in tents, and then even a micro-enterprise avenue. And then as the village was built as a reflection of the community there, we would be capturing light and air and generating food on site and also handling all waste on site. And then this would be a community that would actually have a commerce aspect to it that would attract the rest of the city to come in and shop to support the village. So this was this integrated vision that we immediately started work upon. For people such as this woman, this was the first time in her own life that she had actually built a place herself, and so it was her home, and even though it was still only temporary, the pride of place was incredible to observe. The same with these two people who actually built a passive solar house out of whatever they could cobble together, and then they immediately started to plant gardens. Then there was a burst of activity during the Village Building Convergence, an annual event that we put on in Portland at the end of May every year, and this burst of construction included several straw clay buildings built all at the same time, straw clay being the insulation between light wood frames. So the first straw bale building, unpermitted straw bale building built in the city, became their village store, and then 6 total straw clay structures were built within a span of approximately 10 days. So each one of these costing about $187 in materials to build, all at volunteer labor. So talk about affordable housing. And all of this stuff is envisioned as a process of repair in which people are not just building stuff, but actually building relationships with each other. And I mean, if you just check out the Eco Trust Foundation, it's one of the think tanks in Portland, Oregon. The diagram of bioregional economics that we're paying attention to says there are 3 forms of capital to pay attention to. Natural, economic, but the one that matters the most that you focus on, first, primarily, is social capital. Build human relationships and everything will cost less in so many different respects. So at this point, in spite of what the media has been telling the rest of the city, like, oh, this is such a bad idea, we need to stop this thing, it's terrible, send them back to the doorways and under the bridges. Now it is a verdant landscape of gardens and trees. And in fact, the village is finished. I mean, within the boundaries where it has been built, it is now at capacity. All of these structures have been built, and a third of the population remains as the institutional memory and the guide. 2/3 of the population transitions back out into the city. This is their village piazza. Interestingly, it's a graphic representing the triple goddess Diana, and this drawing represents the finished village. They were saying, this is impossible, this can't possibly be done. You're talking about homeless people, what can they possibly do? What good are they? Saying this about people who have lost parts of their bodies and their minds in warfare, serving their country, and so many other good people.